There's a peculiar kind of exhaustion that settles into the bones of those who have spent years running after something they can't quite name. You know this feeling, don't you? That restless hunger that wakes you at 3 in the morning, whispering that somewhere out there, buried beneath all the noise and confusion of existence, there's a meaning waiting to be discovered, a purpose, a grand narrative that will finally make sense of this strange performance we call living. We've been taught, haven't we, that life is a problem to be solved, a puzzle with a hidden solution, and that if we just think hard enough, search long enough, believe fervently enough, we'll crack the code, and everything will suddenly click into place like the final piece of a cosmic jigsaw. But what if I told you that this very search, this desperate quest for meaning, is itself the problem? Not because meaning doesn't exist, but because in chasing it, you've turned yourself into a dog pursuing its own tail, running in circles, getting dizzier and more confused with each revolution. The irony is almost comedic, really. Here you are, a conscious being capable of experiencing the most extraordinary sensations, the taste of water when you're truly thirsty, the way light breaks through clouds after a storm, the unexpected warmth of human connection. And yet you've convinced yourself that none of this counts unless it means something, unless it points towards some ultimate purpose that exists somewhere else, sometime else, in some other condition than the one you're in right now. Consider for a moment the peculiar nature of this predicament. You are, right now, the universe looking at itself. Think about that. The cosmos, after billions of years of expansion and evolution, has organized itself into the specific form you call yourself, and that form has developed the capacity to ask questions about its own existence. You are not in the universe. You are an expression of it, the way a wave is an expression of the ocean. And yet, this miraculous arrangement seems insufficient. You want to know what it all means, as if meaning was something separate from the experiencing itself, as if the dance needed a reason beyond the dancing. The search for meaning is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of reality, the belief that you are somehow separate from the world you're trying to understand. This is the great illusion, the cosmic joke that isn't funny until you finally get it. We've been conditioned to think of ourselves as isolated subjects, observing an external world of objects, little islands of consciousness adrift in a mechanical universe. From this perspective, meaning becomes something that must be imposed upon reality from the outside, as if the universe were a blank canvas, and we were artists tasked with painting significance onto its emptiness. But look closely at your actual experience. Where do you end and the world begins? You might say at your skin, but your skin is constantly exchanging molecules with the air around you. Every breath you take brings the world into you, and every exhalation sends you out into the world. The food you ate yesterday is now your body, and the body you had 7 years ago is now scattered across the earth. The line between inside and outside is entirely arbitrary, a conceptual convenience rather than a metaphysical reality. You are not a separate self trying to find meaning in a foreign universe. You are the universe's way of experiencing itself, and meaning isn't something you need to find, because you are the process by which meaning emerges. When we chase meaning, we create a peculiar temporal distortion. We project ourselves into an imagined future where we will finally understand, where the pieces will fit together, where everything will make sense. But this future never arrives because it exists only as a thought in the present moment. The present moment, meanwhile, this eternal now, that is the only time you ever actually experience, gets devalued, treated as merely instrumental, a stepping stone to the meaningful moment that will come later. Do you see the trap? You sacrifice the living reality of now for the dead abstraction of then, and then never comes, because when it arrives, it's now again, and you're still not satisfied because you've trained yourself to always be looking ahead. This is what gives rise to that chronic background anxiety that so many of us carry, the sense that we're not quite there yet, that we're missing something, that real life is happening somewhere else or will happen sometime else. We turn existence into a waiting room, convinced that the main event is about to begin, never noticing that the main event is already happening, has always been happening, and couldn't possibly not be happening, because happening is what reality does. It's not that reality contains events. Reality is the eventing, the continual arising and dissolving of experience in this moment, this moment, this moment. The philosopher's stone that everyone seeks, the key to meaning and fulfillment, is paradoxically found only when you stop looking for it. This isn't some mystical riddle designed to frustrate you. It's a simple observation about the structure of experience. When you're searching for something, you're implicitly affirming that you don't have it, that it's absent, that you are incomplete. The searching itself creates and perpetuates the sense of lack. It's like trying to catch your shadow. The very effort ensures failure because the effort assumes a separation between catcher and caught that doesn't actually exist. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should adopt meaninglessness as a philosophy, that you should become a nihilist and declare that nothing matters. That would be just another form of meaning-making, another way of trying to capture reality in a conceptual box. The point isn't to conclude that life is meaningless, but to recognize that meaning isn't a thing you find or create. It's what happens when you stop interfering with the natural intelligence of existence. Meaning isn't absent and then present. It's what's left when you stop obscuring it with your search for it. Think about those moments in your life when you felt most alive, most connected, most complete. Were you thinking about the meaning of life during those moments? Of course not. You were too busy living to worry about what living meant. Maybe you were making love, or creating something beautiful, or laughing so hard your stomach hurt, or simply sitting still and watching the sunset. In those moments, the question of meaning didn't arise because there was no gap between you and your experience, no separation between the experiencer and the experienced. You were fully present, fully engaged, and in that fullness, the hunger for meaning temporarily ceased. But then what happened? Your thinking mind came back online, and it did what thinking minds do. It tried to capture the experience in concepts, to understand it, to extract meaning from it. And in that very movement, the aliveness of the moment slipped away, leaving you with just a memory and a desire to get back to that state. So you start searching again, trying to recreate those peak experiences, those moments of wholeness, not realizing that what made them whole was precisely the absence of the searching, the temporary cessation of the self that's always trying to get somewhere other than here. This is the tyranny of the meaning-making mind. It can't help itself. It's been trained, conditioned, programmed to believe that its job is to make sense of everything, to categorize and label and interpret every experience in terms of some larger narrative. And this can be useful. Language and conceptual thinking are incredible tools that have allowed humans to build civilizations and create art and develop science. But we've forgotten that they're tools, and instead we've mistaken them for reality itself. We've become so identified with the thinking process that we can't distinguish between the map and the territory, between the description and the described. The search for meaning is the ego's way of trying to secure itself, to prove its importance, to establish that it's real and substantial, and not just a fleeting pattern in the flow of experience. The ego needs to feel that there's a point to everything, because without that point, what is the ego? It's just a habit of thought, a convenient fiction, a way of organizing experience that has no more ultimate reality than the character in a dream. And the ego finds this threatening, so it creates elaborate systems of meaning, religions, philosophies, ideologies, personal narratives, all designed to prop up the sense that I am real and important and heading somewhere significant. But underneath all these constructions, there's something that knows better. Call it your true nature, your original face, your Buddha nature, your ground of being. The name doesn't matter because it's not the kind of thing that can be captured in names. It's the awareness that's aware of the search for meaning, the space in which the search appears. And this awareness isn't troubled by questions of meaning because it isn't separate from what is. It doesn't need meaning because it is the source from which all meaning arises, the empty fullness that allows everything to be without requiring justification. When you finally stop chasing meaning, you don't fall into a void. You fall into what you've always been but were too busy searching to notice. you discover that the search itself was the obstacle, that the seeker was what you were seeking, that the eye that sees cannot see itself because it is the seeing. This isn't a state you achieve or a destination you reach. It's a recognition of what's already the case, what's been the case all along, what couldn't not be the case because it's the very ground of your being. Let's go deeper into this peculiar mechanism of the seeking mind, because understanding how we trap ourselves is the first movement toward freedom. You see, the very structure of language predisposes us toward this search for meaning. Every sentence has a subject and an object, an actor and an action, a this pointing to a that. This grammatical structure mirrors and reinforces our belief in separation, the belief that there's a you in here and a world out there, and that you need to find the right relationship between them, the correct way to bridge the gap. But what if the gap is itself an illusion created by the structure of thought? When a baby comes into the world, there is no sense of separation. There's sensation, yes, pleasure and pain, hunger and satisfaction. But there's no me experiencing these things versus a world causing them. That comes later, gradually, as the child learns language and begins to organize experience into categories. This is me, that is mother, that is food, that is dangerous. These distinctions are useful for survival, extraordinarily useful, but somewhere along the way, we forget that they're constructs, conventions, ways of carving up the seamless flow of experience into manageable chunks. We take the map for the territory, and then we spend our lives trying to make sense of a problem that exists only on the map. The search for meaning is intimately connected to our sense of time, and our sense of time is intimately connected to our sense of self. Notice how the past is always interpreted through memory. It's not actually past in your experience, it's present as memory. And the future is always imagined. It's not actually future in your experience, it's present as anticipation or anxiety or hope. So all you ever have is now. But the thinking mind creates this elaborate temporal structure, this narrative of a self moving through time from past to future, and meaning gets defined as something that connects these temporal points, a thread that runs through the story of your life and makes it cohere. But who is the you that supposedly moves through time? Look for it. Really look. You'll find memories of previous experiences, but those are present thoughts. You'll find anticipations of future events, but those are present thoughts too. You'll find sensations in your body, emotions, perceptions, but none of these is the essential you. They're all experiences that come and go. The sense of being a continuous self persisting through time is itself a thought arising in the timeless present. It's an incredibly useful thought for navigating practical life, but it's not the deepest truth of what you are. When you recognize this, something extraordinary happens. The burden of creating a meaningful life story begins to lift. Not because you become irresponsible or nihilistic, but because you realize that the storyline was always optional, always interpretive, always imposed upon rather than inherent in experience itself. Life doesn't need to mean something in order to be lived fully. In fact, it's the opposite. Life can only be lived fully when you stop requiring it to mean something, when you stop judging each moment against some imagined standard of significance. This is what the Zen masters were getting at with their paradoxical teachings and their refusal to explain. When a student asks, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West?" which is really asking, "What is the meaning of Buddhism, the meaning of spiritual practice, the meaning of seeking enlightenment?" the master might respond, "The cypress tree in the courtyard," or he might whack the student with a stick, or he might simply laugh. These responses aren't meant to be cryptic or mysterious in some precious way. They're pointing directly at the answer by refusing to give an answer, by short-circuiting the meaning-making machinery of the conceptual mind. The cypress tree in the courtyard doesn't symbolize anything. It doesn't represent some deeper truth. It doesn't point beyond itself to a more fundamental reality. It simply is what it is, a tree growing, standing, being. And in that simple being, there is a completeness that no amount of philosophical explanation could capture. The meaning of the tree is the tree. The meaning of your life is your life. Not your life as you imagine it should be. Not your life as it would be if only certain conditions were met, but your life exactly as it is right now, with all its imperfections and uncertainties and unresolved questions. But this is exactly what the seeking mind can't accept. It wants guarantees, assurances, a clear map showing where we are and where we're going. It wants to know that the struggle is worth it, that suffering serves a purpose, that there's a reward waiting at the end of all this effort. And so we create elaborate metaphysical systems, karma and reincarnation, heaven and hell, progress toward enlightenment, evolution of consciousness, all designed to make it all make sense, to ensure that nothing is wasted, that everything counts, that the universe is fundamentally fair and meaningful. And perhaps it is. Perhaps there is a grand design, a cosmic purpose, a divine plan unfolding. I'm not here to argue theology or metaphysics. What I'm pointing to is something more immediate and more radical than any belief system. The recognition that even if there is an ultimate meaning to existence, you will never experience it as something separate from your experience itself. The meaning, if there is one, is inseparable from the living, not an explanation of the living or a justification for it. You don't need to know the meaning in order to live fully, any more than your heart needs to know the theory of circulation in order to pump blood. Consider the way you related to life as a child, before you developed sophisticated ideas about meaning and purpose. Do you remember that quality of absorption in play, where you could spend hours arranging toys or building with blocks or pretending to be a pirate, completely immersed in the activity without any thought of what it meant or where it was leading? That wasn't childish in the sense of being immature. That was wisdom, the natural state of being that we gradually trained ourselves out of as we learned to be serious adults who are always working towards something, achieving something, becoming something. The irony is that we then spend the second half of life trying to recapture that lost spontaneity, that capacity for absorption and presence. We take up meditation or art or extreme sports, anything that promises to get us out of our heads and back into immediate experience. We're trying to return to the garden, to rediscover the paradise we left behind when we ate from the tree of knowledge, when we became self-conscious and began to view ourselves as separate observers of our own lives, rather than simply being our lives. But you can't go back to unconscious innocence once consciousness has dawned. The return to paradise, if it happens, is not a regression, but a progression through and beyond self-consciousness, to what we might call superconsciousness or no consciousness, a state where there is full awareness, but no separation between awareness and what is being aware of, no gap between subject and object, no need for meaning, because there's no separation requiring bridging. This might sound abstract or mystical, but it's actually the most concrete, practical thing in the world. It's as simple as listening to music and becoming the music, so absorbed that there's no you listening and no music being listened to, just the happening of music listening as a single, unified event. It's as ordinary as washing dishes and being fully present to the warm water, the smooth surface of the plate, the circular motion of your hand, without the mental commentary that says, I'm washing dishes and I'd rather be doing something else, something more meaningful. Every activity, no matter how mundane, contains this possibility of total absorption, of meaning dissolving into pure doing. But we've been trained to hierarchize our activities, to believe that some things are inherently more meaningful than others, that contemplating the nature of reality is more meaningful than washing dishes, that creating art is more meaningful than taking out the trash, that dramatic peak experiences are more meaningful than ordinary Tuesday afternoons. And so we're always trying to accumulate the meaningful activities and avoid the meaningless ones, not seeing that this very sorting is what creates meaninglessness, what drains the vitality from life. When you finally stop chasing meaning, you discover that everything that exists has the same taste, the same quality of suchness, or isness, or thusness, what the Buddhists call tathata. The garbage has it, and the rose has it, and your greatest triumph has it, and your most shameful failure has it. Not because everything is equally meaningless in a nihilistic sense, but because meaning and meaninglessness are both concepts, both interpretations, both ways of standing apart from experience and judging it rather than being it. There's a wonderful story about the Zen master who was asked to explain the highest teaching of Buddhism. He held up one finger. Just one finger. No words, no explanation, no doctrine or philosophy. Just this gesture. And in that gesture, if you really see it, there's everything. Not because the finger symbolizes oneness or unity or any abstract principle, but because the finger is just exactly what it is, completely itself, needing nothing, explaining nothing, meaning nothing beyond its own simple existence. And if you can see that with the finger, you can see it with everything, with your whole life. But of course the questioner likely missed the point, because the questioner was looking for meaning, for an explanation, for something the mind could grasp and hold on to. The finger points at the moon, as they say, but we study the finger and miss the moon. Or worse, we study the finger and create elaborate theories about what the moon must be like based on the direction of the pointing, never bothering to look up and see for ourselves. This is what all the great wisdom traditions are trying to tell us, each in their own language. Stop thinking about life and live it. Stop searching for meaning and be what you are. Stop trying to become enlightened and recognize that enlightenment is not a state you achieve, but the reality you've always been, obscured only by the effort to achieve it. The kingdom of heaven is within you, spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. Why? Because they're looking for it somewhere else, in some other condition than this one. Now you might be thinking, this all sounds fine in theory, but what about the real problems of life? What about suffering and injustice and the genuine difficulties we face? Isn't the search for meaning a way of coping with these hard realities? If I stop looking for meaning, won't I just collapse into despair? This is a crucial objection, and it deserves a careful response, because I'm not advocating for a kind of spiritual bypass where we pretend everything is fine and avoid engaging with the genuine challenges of existence. The confusion here lies in equating the cessation of the search for meaning with passive resignation or nihilistic indifference. But these are not the same thing at all. When you stop chasing meaning, you don't become passive, you become responsive. You don't stop caring, you start caring more deeply because your care isn't mediated through layers of interpretation and judgment. You're not filtering every experience through the question, what does this mean for my personal narrative? And so you're more available to what's actually happening, more capable of appropriate action. Think about it this way. When you're caught up in the search for meaning, you're constantly relating to life through a conceptual filter. Something happens, and immediately your mind starts working to fit it into your story, to determine whether it's good or bad for you, whether it confirms or challenges your beliefs about how things should be. This interpretive process creates a delay, a gap between experience and response. You're not responding to reality itself. You're responding to your ideas about reality, your fears and hopes and expectations about what things mean. But when the search drops away, when you're no longer invested in maintaining a particular story about who you are and what your life means, something remarkable happens. You become more intelligent, not less. You become more capable of seeing things clearly and responding appropriately, not paralyzed by indecision or lost in confusion. It's like the difference between trying to hit a baseball while thinking about the physics of motion versus just swinging. The thinking gets in the way of the doing, and the best athletes will tell you that peak performance happens when thought recedes and the body simply knows what to do. This is what the Taoists call Wu Wei, action without action, or more accurately, action without the sense of being a separate actor forcing things to happen according to your will. It's not passivity or laziness, it's a kind of effortless effort, like water flowing around obstacles, always taking the path of least resistance, but eventually wearing down mountains. Water doesn't need to know the meaning of its flowing in order to flow perfectly. It simply follows its nature, and in following its nature, it accomplishes everything without trying. And here's the thing. When you live this way, not chasing meaning, but simply responding to what arises, you often find yourself engaged in meaningful activities anyway. But the meaning is discovered in the doing rather than imposed from outside. You help someone not because you've concluded that helping others gives your life meaning, but because helping is simply what emerges naturally, when you're present to another person's suffering. You create art not because you've decided that creative expression is meaningful, but because creating is simply what flows through you when you're not blocked by self-consciousness and concern about whether your work is significant enough. The problem with the meaning-seeking mind is that it's always trying to justify existence, to prove that life is worth living, that your particular life matters in some cosmic sense. But this very effort implies doubt. If you really knew that existence was intrinsically worthwhile, you wouldn't need to keep proving it to yourself. It's like constantly asking your partner if they love you. The very question undermines what you're seeking to confirm. The search for meaning is a symptom of having lost touch with the immediate vitality of being, and then trying to recover that vitality through thought, which is like trying to quench your thirst by looking at a picture of water. When suffering arises in your life, and it will arise because suffering is woven into the very fabric of embodied existence, you can meet it in two ways. You can meet it through the lens of meaning, asking, why is this happening to me? What does this mean? What am I supposed to learn from this? Questions that create an additional layer of mental suffering on top of the original pain. Or you can meet it directly, immediately, without the interpretive overlay, simply experiencing what is present without needing it to make sense or serve a purpose. This second way doesn't make the pain disappear, but it radically transforms your relationship to it. Pain without the story of suffering, without the why me, and the this shouldn't be happening, and the what does this mean for my future. This is just pain, just sensation, arising and passing like everything else. It's still unpleasant, still something you naturally move to avoid or alleviate, but it's no longer a problem that threatens your entire sense of self and world. It's just what's happening right now, and right now is always manageable in a way that the story of past pain and future pain never is. The search for meaning often intensifies around questions of mortality. We want to know what happens after death, whether our lives will have mattered in the long run, whether there's some continuity of consciousness or personal identity beyond the dissolution of the body. These are natural questions, arising from our capacity for self-reflection and our awareness of our own finitude. But notice what happens when you sit with these questions without rushing to answer them, without grasping for comforting beliefs or settling into cynical conclusions. There's a moment, if you stay with the not knowing, where the urgency drops away and you find yourself simply here, alive, conscious, without needing to know what it all means or where it's all going. In that moment, death is just a concept, and what's real is this breath, this sensation, this aliveness that doesn't need justification. And from that place, the way you live naturally changes. Not because you've figured out the right philosophy or discovered the ultimate meaning, but because when you're not obsessed with securing yourself against death and meaninglessness, you're more available to actually live, to engage fully with what's here. This is not the same as the cliché, live each day as if it were your last, which is just another form of meaning-making, another way of trying to intensify experience through a conceptual framework. It's simpler and more radical than that. It's the recognition that you never experience anything other than now, that the past and future are always present experiences of memory and anticipation, and that this now doesn't need to be anything other than what it is in order to be complete. From this recognition, a different kind of ethics emerges, not an ethics based on rules or rewards, or the quest for personal meaning, but an ethics that flows naturally from clear seeing. When you're not trapped in the separate self that's always trying to secure its own position, always concerned with what things mean for me and my story, you naturally respond to the situation with wisdom and compassion. Not because you should, not because it gives your life meaning, but because the sense of separation that makes cruelty possible has temporarily dissolved. This is why the great spiritual teachings consistently point toward the dissolution of the ego, the death of the separate self, not as some kind of annihilation, but as a liberation from the prison of selfing, the exhausting process of constantly trying to establish and defend and enhance this fictitious entity called me. When that relaxes, when you stop taking yourself so seriously as a separate individual whose life needs to mean something, you don't disappear. Exactly the opposite. You become more real, more present, more responsive, because you're no longer filtered through layers of self-concern and meaning-seeking. But let's be clear about what we're pointing to here, because it's easy to make this into another ideal to strive for, another achievement to add to your collection, another way of feeling special and enlightened. The dissolution of ego is not a state you attain. It's what's revealed when the effort to maintain ego temporarily ceases. It's not something you do. It's what happens when you stop doing, when you stop trying to make yourself into something, when you simply allow yourself to be what you already are. And what you already are is not a thing, not a fixed entity with a definite nature, but a process, a flowing, a happening. You are the universe doing human being, the way the ocean does waves. A wave can ask, "What is the meaning of my existence?" But the question reveals a misunderstanding. The wave doesn't have a separate existence apart from the ocean. It's a temporary pattern, a particular way the ocean is moving right now, and when the wave subsides, nothing is lost because the wave was never separate from the water to begin with. This might sound like a reduction of your individuality, a negation of your unique personhood, but it's actually the opposite. When you recognize that your separate self is a fiction, you don't lose anything real. You lose only the burden of trying to make that fiction seem real through the endless search for meaning and significance. What remains is your actual experiencing, your unique perspective, your particular way of being conscious, but now without the anxiety and grasping that comes from believing you're an isolated entity that needs to justify its existence. Your personality, your preferences, your talents and limitations, none of these disappear when you stop chasing meaning. They're still here, still operating, but they're not taken so seriously, not invested with ultimate significance. You can be yourself more fully because you're not constantly trying to prove that yourself matters, not measuring every experience against the question of whether it contributes to a meaningful life. You're free to play, to experiment, to fail without devastation, and succeed without inflation, because it's all just the dance, just the play of consciousness, just what's happening in the eternal improvisation of existence. There's a deeper layer to this that we need to explore, something that might seem paradoxical at first. The recognition that the search for meaning and the stopping of that search are themselves part of a larger rhythm, a cosmic breathing that includes both the going out and the coming back, both the question and the silence that follows the question. You see, I'm not suggesting that you should try to stop searching for meaning, because that would just be another form of searching, another project for the self-improvement committee of your mind. The stopping happens by itself when the search exhausts itself, when you finally see through it completely, when the futility becomes so obvious that the whole enterprise simply collapses of its own weight. This is why all the great spiritual traditions include what seems like a contradiction. They encourage intense seeking while simultaneously pointing out the futility of seeking. They say strive diligently, and then they say there's nowhere to go and nothing to achieve. They set up elaborate practices and disciplines, and then they pull the rug out from under you by revealing that what you're looking for is what's looking, that the goal is the starting point, that you've never been separate from what you're seeking. This is not confusion or mystification. It's a deliberate paradox designed to exhaust the seeking mechanism itself. Think of it like this. Imagine trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You can look left, look right, look up, look down, but no matter where you look, you can't see the eyes that are doing the looking, because they're always on the subject side of the equation, never on the object side. In the same way, you can't find the meaning of your existence by searching for it, because the searcher is itself the question you're trying to answer. The search presupposes a separation between seeker and sought that doesn't actually exist. You are the meaning you're looking for, but not as an object to be found, rather as the subject that's doing the finding, the awareness in which the entire search appears. When this becomes clear, not as a concept, but as a lived realization, something shifts fundamentally. It's not that you now have an answer to the question of meaning. It's that the question itself is seen to be based on a false premise, like asking, what does blue taste like? Or, how heavy is the color green? The question category mistakes itself out of relevance. Life doesn't have a meaning in the way that a sentence has a meaning, where the meaning is something separate from the sentence that can be extracted and paraphrased. Life is its own meaning, or to put it more accurately, life is the happening of meaning-making, the process by which meaning emerges, and this process doesn't require justification any more than a song requires a justification beyond the singing of it. Now, when I talk about the search exhausting itself, I don't mean that you'll reach some permanent state of enlightenment where you never again wonder about meaning or purpose. Life is too rich, too varied, too constantly changing for that kind of frozen perfection. What happens instead is that the quality of your questioning changes. Instead of desperate, anxious searching driven by the fear that life might be meaningless and you might be wasting your precious time, you find yourself entertaining questions about existence with a kind of playfulness, a lightness, the way a cat plays with a toy, fully engaged but not desperate, interested but not attached to any particular outcome. This playful quality is important, and it's often misunderstood. When I suggest that life might be more like play than like work, more like art than like duty, I'm not advocating for hedonism or irresponsibility. I'm pointing to something that children understand instinctively, but that we've forgotten as we've grown into serious adults. That the universe is not a test you can pass or fail, not a courtroom where you'll be judged, not a marketplace where you earn your worth through productive labor. These are all human constructs, all particular ways of organizing social life that serve certain functions, but don't reveal the fundamental nature of existence itself. The universe, as near as we can tell, is an expression of creativity for its own sake, a spontaneous arising of patterns and forms and experiences without any external purpose requiring justification. Stars form and explode, galaxies spiral and collide, life emerges and evolves. All of this happening without anyone in charge, without a grand plan, without needing permission or justification. It's all just happening, endlessly creative, endlessly destructive, endlessly transforming, like an eternal dance where the dancer and the dance are one, where there's no distinction between the art and the artist, between the universe and the process of universing. And you are not separate from this dance. You are one of the ways the universe is currently manifesting, one of the forms it's taking in this particular corner of space-time. Your consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself. Your questions are the universe questioning itself. And your search for meaning is the universe trying to understand itself through the form called you. When this is deeply recognized, the burden shifts. You're no longer responsible for creating meaning in a meaningless universe. You're the process by which meaning manifests. The way an apple tree is the process by which apples manifest. An apple tree doesn't agonize about whether appling is meaningful. It's simply apples because that's what apple trees do. And you human because that's what humans do. You think and feel and question and create and suffer and celebrate and search for meaning because that's part of the human pattern, the human dance. But the dancing doesn't require justification. The tree doesn't need to prove that producing apples is worthwhile. It produces apples because that's its nature. And your nature, as a conscious being, includes this capacity to wonder about meaning. But the wondering is itself part of what makes human life what it is. It doesn't need to lead anywhere or accomplish anything to be valid. This perspective radically shifts your relationship to all the activities and concerns of life. Work is no longer something you do to earn the right to live or to create a meaningful existence. Work is simply what flows through you when you're not blocked by self-consciousness and anxiety. Love is no longer a strategy for finding fulfillment or filling an inner void. Love is what happens naturally when the barriers of self-protection temporarily dissolve. Suffering is no longer a problem requiring explanation or a challenge designed to teach you something. Suffering is just the shadow side of the capacity to feel, the inevitable companion of having a nervous system that registers pain. Everything becomes simpler when you stop requiring it to mean something beyond itself. A rose doesn't symbolize anything. It's just magnificently, perfectly, completely a rose. A sunset doesn't represent anything. It's just light refracting through atmosphere in a particular way that creates certain colors and patterns. And your life, with all its complications and confusions, all its joys and sorrows, all its mundane moments and peak experiences, it's not a symbol pointing to some deeper reality. It is the reality, presenting itself directly, immediately, without mediation. But here's where it gets interesting. Even as I say all this, even as I point toward the futility of meaning-seeking and the fullness of immediate experience, I'm using words, creating concepts, building an argument, all of which are forms of meaning-making. This is the paradox we can't escape. We're meaning-making creatures trying to see through meaning-making, using thought to point beyond thought, using language to indicate something that language can't capture. It's like trying to taste your own tongue or bite your own teeth. The instrument you're using is the thing you're trying to examine. So what do we do with this paradox? We could tie ourselves in knots trying to resolve it logically, trying to find a consistent philosophical position that explains everything. Or we could simply acknowledge it, laugh at it even, and continue playing in the space where meaning and meaninglessness dance together, where the search and the finding are revealed to be the same movement, where every answer generates new questions, and every question contains its own answer if you sit with it long enough. This is why the ancient wisdom teachings so often resort to silence or paradox or poetry. They're trying to point to something that can't be captured in straightforward conceptual language because it's not a thing that can be objectified, not a truth that can be stated in propositions. It's more like a direction, a gesture, an invitation to look in a certain way, to shift your perspective slightly, and see what's been here all along, but obscured by the very effort to see it. When Zen masters talk about ordinary mind being the way, when Taoists speak of returning to the uncarved block, when mystics describe the cloud of unknowing or the dark night of the soul, they're all circling around the same recognition that the sophisticated philosophical and spiritual seeking we engage in is ultimately a detour, a necessary detour perhaps, but still a movement away from the simple fact of being before we complicate it with all our questions about what it means and where it's going and whether we're doing it right. The stopping of the search for meaning is not an achievement or an arrival at a final answer. It's more like a relaxation, a softening, a gentle letting go of the grip you didn't even know you had. It's what happens when you finally exhaust all the places you thought meaning might be hiding, and you're left with just this, just here, just now. Not as a disappointing remainder after all the interesting stuff has been removed, but as the overflowing fullness that was always present, but overlooked in your search for something more, something elsewhere, something other than what simply is. And from this place, from this relaxed presence that isn't seeking anything, life unfolds with its own intelligence. You still make plans, still have preferences, still work toward goals and avoid dangers, but there's a different quality to it all. It's lighter, more flexible, more responsive to what's actually happening, rather than bound to what you think should happen based on your story about what would make your life meaningful. You're playing the game of life without taking the game so seriously that you forget it's a game, engaged fully without being desperate about the outcome. Let's examine more carefully what happens in those moments when the search temporarily ceases, because these moments are actually more common than we usually recognize. Every time you're fully absorbed in something, really listening to music, deeply engaged in conversation, lost in a book, immersed in a creative project, present to the taste of food or the sensation of walking, there's a temporary suspension of the meaning-seeking mechanism. In these moments, you're not wondering what it all means because you're too busy being what you are, doing what you're doing. Athletes call this flow state. Artists call it inspiration. Mystics call it presence or satori or unity consciousness. But these are all just different names for the same basic phenomenon, the collapse of the separation between subject and object, experiencer and experienced, self and world. In flow, there's no you standing apart from what you're doing, observing yourself and judging whether your activity is meaningful enough. There's just the activity itself, happening with a kind of effortless precision that the thinking mind could never orchestrate. What's interesting is that we often don't recognize these moments for what they are until afterward, Once the thinking mind comes back online and starts reflecting on the experience, then we say, "That was amazing. I was completely in the zone. I lost track of time." As if losing your self-consciousness were a special state, rather than recognizing that self-consciousness is the special state, the artificial imposition, and that this flowing responsiveness is actually more natural, more fundamental to what we are. The thinking mind doesn't like this news. It wants to be in charge, wants to be important, wants to believe that its constant commentary and evaluation and meaning-making are essential to living well. It's like the conductor of an orchestra who's convinced that without his frantic gestures, the musicians couldn't possibly play together, not realizing that often they play better when they simply listen to each other and respond directly to what they hear, rather than following his interpretation of what the music should mean. This is not to say that thinking isn't valuable. Clearly it is. We couldn't be having this conversation without it. But thinking has gotten confused about its role. It's a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. When thinking is in service to living, when concepts arise to help clarify and communicate and navigate the world, that's appropriate and useful. But when thinking becomes autonomous, when it starts running constantly in the background, generating anxiety about meaning and significance and whether you're wasting your life, then it's become parasitic, draining the vitality from immediate experience. The search for meaning is largely driven by thinking run amok, by the conceptual mind creating problems that don't exist at the level of immediate experience. Right now, in this moment, before you think about it, is there a problem? Is there a lack of meaning? Or is there simply sensation, perception, awareness, the basic fact of being conscious and alive? The problem of meaning arises only when you start to think about your life as a whole, to view it from the outside as if you were watching a movie and wondering what the movie is about, what message it's trying to convey, whether it's a good movie or a waste of time. But you're not watching your life from outside. You are your life, from the inside. And from the inside, there's no lack of meaning, because there's no distance from which to ask the question. The tree growing in the forest isn't wondering whether treeing is meaningful. The river flowing to the sea isn't troubled by questions of purpose. The stars burning in the cosmic darkness aren't seeking significance. They simply do what they do, and in that doing, they are complete, whole, exactly what they are, without remainder or regret. We are not different, fundamentally, from trees and rivers and stars. We're made of the same matter, governed by the same forces, expressions of the same universe. What makes us unique is this capacity for self-reflection, this ability to step back and observe ourselves and ask questions about what it all means. This is a remarkable capacity, perhaps the most remarkable thing about human consciousness, but we've mistaken it for our primary mode of being, rather than recognizing it as one possibility among many, one note in the symphony of consciousness, rather than the only note worth playing. When you finally stop chasing meaning, you don't lose this capacity for reflection. You couldn't lose it if you tried. It's built into the structure of human consciousness. But you stop being enslaved by it. You stop believing that the reflected life is more real than the lived life, that thinking about experience is more important than having experience, that understanding what things mean is the point of existence. And in that stopping, a space opens up where life can simply be what it is, without constantly having to justify itself to the tribunal of your thinking mind. This space, this openness, this freedom from the tyranny of meaning-seeking, this is what all the spiritual practices are ultimately pointing toward. Meditation, prayer, contemplation, ritual, study of sacred texts. All of these are techniques for temporarily suspending the meaning-making machinery and giving you a taste of what's here when you're not constantly interpreting and judging and trying to figure everything out. They're not ends in themselves. They're fingers pointing at the moon, boats you use to cross the river and then leave behind once you've reached the other shore. But what is the other shore? It's not some special mystical state where you float around in blissful emptiness forever. It's this shore, seen clearly, experienced directly, without the filter of concepts and meanings and stories. It's ordinary life, but ordinary in the sense of original or primary, not in the sense of boring or insignificant. It's what the Zen tradition calls your original face before your parents were born. Not a past condition you need to return to, but the basic fact of awareness that's always here, always now, always just this simple presence that needs no meaning, because it is the source from which all meaning arises. And here's the beautiful thing. When you're established in this basic presence, when you're no longer desperately seeking meaning to justify your existence, you become more effective, not less. Your actions flow more smoothly because they're not constantly being second-guessed by the meaning-making mind. Your relationships deepen because you're actually present to the other person, rather than filtering them through your story about what the relationship means. Your creative work becomes more authentic because you're not trying to make it significant or impressive. You're just expressing what wants to be expressed through you. This is the great irony. The search for meaning is motivated by the desire to live well, to not waste your precious time, to make your existence matter. But the search itself is what creates the sense of meaninglessness, the feeling that something essential is missing, that you're not quite living fully. And when the search stops, when you're no longer measuring everything against some imagined standard of significance, you find yourself actually living, directly and immediately, without the constant meta-commentary about whether what you're doing is meaningful enough. You still have preferences, of course. You still choose to do some things and not others, still work toward goals and avoid pain. But the quality of these choices changes. They're not freighted with existential weight, not burdened with the question of whether they're contributing to a meaningful life. They're just responses to what's needed in the moment, expressions of who and what you are, movements in the dance of existence that don't require justification. Consider how this might transform your relationship to work. Most people experience work as a burden, something they have to do to earn money to fund the life they'll live later, in their free time, on vacation, in retirement. Work is instrumental, a means to an end, and so it's fundamentally unsatisfying even when you're good at it and well compensated for it. You're always oriented toward the future, toward when you can stop working and start really living. But this creates a split in your being, a division between the working self who endures and the supposedly real self who gets to enjoy life when work is done. But what if you're not trying to make your work meaningful? What if you're just working, fully engaged with whatever task is at hand, not because it serves some grand purpose, but simply because it's what's happening now? Suddenly work stops being a burden and becomes just activity, sometimes pleasant and sometimes unpleasant, but not fundamentally different from any other activity. And in that shift, the division between work and life dissolves. It's all just life, all just what you're doing right now, all worthy of your full attention and presence, regardless of whether it seems significant from some imaginary external viewpoint. The same transformation can happen with relationships. We put so much pressure on our relationships to be meaningful, to fulfill us, to complete us, to give us a sense of purpose and significance. We're constantly evaluating whether our friendships and romances are deep enough, whether they're meeting our needs, whether they're contributing to our personal growth and life satisfaction. And this constant evaluation creates a heaviness, a sense of lack even in the midst of connection, because you're never quite sure if what you have is meaningful enough. But when you stop requiring your relationships to mean something, to complete you, or save you, or validate you, they become much simpler and somehow deeper at the same time. You can just be with another person, enjoying their company, or navigating difficulties together, without the constant background anxiety about whether this relationship is fulfilling its proper function in your life narrative. And paradoxically, when you stop grasping for meaning from relationships, they often become more genuinely intimate, because you're relating to the actual person in front of you, rather than to your idea of what the relationship should provide. There's something we need to address directly, something that might be troubling you as you listen to all this. If I stop searching for meaning, won't I become complacent? Won't I lose my motivation to improve myself, to contribute to the world, to make a difference? Isn't the search for meaning what drives human progress and gives us the will to overcome obstacles and work toward a better future? These are important questions, and they point to a common misunderstanding about what it means to stop chasing meaning. The confusion lies in equating the cessation of meaning-seeking with the adoption of meaninglessness as a philosophy, with concluding that nothing matters and therefore we might as well do nothing. But that's not what we're talking about at all. We're not replacing the belief that life is meaningful with the belief that life is meaningless. We're questioning the entire framework of meaning versus meaninglessness, suggesting that this is a false dichotomy, a conceptual trap that misrepresents the actual nature of existence. When you stop chasing meaning, you don't lose motivation. You discover a different kind of motivation, one that's not driven by anxiety, or the need to prove something, or the fear of wasting your life. This motivation is more like what flows through an artist when they're truly inspired. They're not painting because they've concluded that art gives life meaning. They're painting because painting is simply what's flowing through them in that moment. The activity itself is its own justification. It doesn't need to serve some external purpose to be worthy of doing. This is closer to what the ancient Greeks meant by telos, not purpose in the sense of an external goal, but something more like fulfillment of nature, the actualization of inherent potential. An acorn doesn't become an oak tree because it has concluded that tree being is meaningful. It becomes a tree because that's what acorns do. That's the pattern unfolding. That's the nature expressing itself. And when the unfolding happens smoothly, when the tree grows strong and tall, we might say it has fulfilled its telos, not because it has achieved some externally imposed goal, but because it has fully actualized what it was potential for. As humans, our potential includes consciousness, creativity, compassion, curiosity, the capacity to understand and transform our environment. When these capacities express themselves freely, when they're not blocked or distorted by anxiety and grasping and the desperate search for meaning, they often lead to what we call progress, contribution, making a difference. But the difference-making isn't the reason for the action. It's the natural result of human capacities flowing freely. You help others not because you've decided that service gives your life meaning, but because when you're present to suffering and not caught up in self-concern, helping is simply what emerges. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. When you're trying to create a meaningful life, there's always a quality of forcing, of imposing your will on reality, of manipulating circumstances to conform to your idea of what would make your existence significant. This creates tension and struggle, and often leads to frustration when reality doesn't cooperate with your meaning-making project. But when you're simply expressing what you are, responding to what's needed, allowing your natural capacities to flow, there's a quality of ease and appropriateness, even when what you're doing is difficult or challenging. Think about the difference between trying to be loving and actually loving. When you try to be loving because you've concluded that love is important or meaningful, there's a kind of self-consciousness that prevents genuine openness to the other. You're monitoring yourself, checking whether you're being loving enough, whether your love is having the desired effect, whether this loving behavior is contributing to your identity as a loving person. But when love simply flows, when you're moved by another's situation without thinking about what it means or whether you're being appropriately loving, there's a directness and authenticity that can't be manufactured through effort. The same is true for all the activities we typically consider meaningful: creating, learning, contributing, connecting. When these arise naturally from your being, rather than being pursued as a strategy for creating meaning, they have a different quality. They're lighter, but somehow more profound, effortless, but more effective, playful, but more serious, in the sense that they're dealing directly with reality, rather than with your ideas about reality. Now you might ask, but don't we need ideals and goals to strive toward? Don't we need to believe that what we're doing matters in order to sustain long-term effort? And yes, from a practical standpoint, having goals and working toward them is part of how human life functions. But there's a difference between using goals as practical organizing principles and investing them with ultimate significance, between working towards something you prefer and believing that your worth as a person depends on achieving it. You can aim at targets without believing that hitting them is what makes your life meaningful. You can work hard at something without the background anxiety that failure would render your existence pointless. In fact, you can work more effectively this way because you're not carrying the extra burden of existential significance. A basketball player shoots free throws more accurately when they're relaxed and focused on the process, rather than desperately trying to prove something or terrified of missing. The same principle applies to all of life. Presence and ease lead to better outcomes than grasping and anxiety. What often happens when the search for meaning drops away is not that you become passive or nihilistic, but that you become more naturally aligned with what the Taoists call the way, what Buddhists call Dharma, what we might simply call the natural order or the grain of reality. You're no longer constantly fighting against what is, trying to force reality to conform to your meaning-making project. Instead, you're dancing with what is, responding creatively to circumstances, working with the grain rather than against it. This doesn't mean you become passive or accepting of injustice or unwilling to work for change. It means your actions come from a different place, from presence and clear seeing, rather than from the ego's need to feel significant. When you see suffering, you respond. Not because responding gives your life meaning, but because responding is simply what clarity does when it encounters suffering. When you see possibility, you create. Not because creating proves you're a meaningful person, but because creating is what human consciousness does when it's not blocked by self-doubt and the need for justification. There's a wonderful freedom in this. You're released from the exhausting project of constantly trying to make your life add up to something, constantly measuring whether you're being meaningful enough, constantly worrying that you might be wasting your precious time. You can just be here, doing what's needed or what's calling, engaged fully with the present, rather than constantly checking whether the present is contributing to your meaningful life narrative. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to create a meaningful life, your life often becomes richer and more full. This isn't because you found the right answer or the correct philosophy. It's because you've stopped draining your energy into the futile project of justifying your existence. That energy becomes available for actual living, for responding, for creating, for loving, for all the activities that make human life the incredible adventure that it is. But we must be careful here not to turn this into another spiritual ideal, another achievement to pursue. Now I will stop searching for meaning and be enlightened is just the search for meaning in a more sophisticated disguise. The stopping cannot be willed or achieved or accomplished. It happens by itself when you see clearly enough, when the futility of the search becomes obvious, when the whole structure of seeking collapses under its own weight. You can't make this happen, but you can stop preventing it from happening by constantly distracting yourself with new meaning-making projects. The practices of meditation, contemplation, and inquiry aren't about achieving a state of not seeking. They're about creating space for clarity to emerge, space where you can see how the seeking mechanism operates, how it creates the sense of lack it then tries to fill. Through patient observation, the pattern becomes transparent, and what's transparent loses its power. You see that you're chasing your tail, that the seeker is the sought, that the problem is the solution, and in that seeing the whole game collapses, not forever necessarily, but in that moment, and then perhaps again and again, until the pattern of seeking and stopping becomes as natural as breathing in and breathing out. So here we are, near the end of this exploration, and perhaps you're wondering what you're supposed to do with all of this. How do you actually stop chasing meaning? What's the practical application? And these questions themselves reveal how deeply conditioned we are to seek techniques and methods, to want clear instructions for achieving the state we imagine will solve all our problems. But the stopping we're talking about isn't something you can do. It's something that happens when you stop doing, when you finally exhaust the doing and collapse into simple being. This is why all the spiritual traditions eventually point beyond their own teachings and practices. The Buddha said, "Don't cling to the Dharma like a raft once you've crossed the river." The Zen masters burned their scriptures and said, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." The Christian mystics spoke of the dark night of the soul, where all concepts of God must be released. They're all pointing to the same recognition, that the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon, that the map is not the territory, that all teachings and practices are ultimately provisional, skillful means, designed to bring you to a place where you can see directly for yourself. What you see when you see directly is nothing special, nothing mystical or otherworldly. You see this, just this, exactly what's here, when you're not covering it with layers of interpretation and judgment and meaning-making. You see that the ordinary is extraordinary precisely because it doesn't need to be extraordinary to be fully itself. The taste of water, the feeling of breath, the sound of rain, the presence of another person, these simple experiences are complete as they are. They don't point beyond themselves to some deeper meaning. They are the meaning, presenting itself directly and immediately. This recognition doesn't solve all your problems or answer all your questions. You still face challenges, still experience pain and confusion, still don't know what happens after death, or why the universe exists, or what consciousness really is. But the quality of your not knowing changes. Instead of being a source of anxiety, a problem that needs solving, it becomes the very space in which life unfolds, the openness that makes experience possible. You're comfortable with mystery because you realize that mystery is not a temporary condition that will be resolved once you figure everything out. Mystery is the basic nature of existence, the ground of all knowing and unknowing. When you're comfortable with mystery, when you're no longer desperately seeking answers and meanings and explanations, something remarkable happens. You become more alive to what's actually here. Your senses become clearer because they're not filtered through layers of conceptual interpretation. Your relationships become more genuine because you're meeting the other person as they are, rather than as you need them to be for your meaning-making project. Your creativity flows more freely because you're not constantly judging whether what you're creating is significant enough. Life becomes simpler, not in the sense of easy or problem-free, but in the sense of direct, immediate, unmediated. You're no longer living primarily in your head, in stories about the past and worries about the future, in concepts and interpretations and judgments. You're living more in your senses, in your body, in the present moment that is the only moment you ever actually experience. And this present moment, when you're fully in it, when you're not trying to extract meaning from it or use it to get somewhere else, is sufficient. Not because it contains some special quality that makes it perfect, but because sufficiency is its nature. This moment is always exactly what it is, complete and whole, lacking nothing. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not painting a picture of some ideal state where you're perpetually blissed out and all your problems have disappeared. That would just be another fantasy, another meaning-making project disguised as spirituality. What I'm describing is much more ordinary and much more profound than that. It's the simple recognition that you don't need your life to mean something in order to live it fully, that the search for meaning is itself what creates the sense of meaninglessness, and that when the search stops, what remains is not a void, but the overflowing fullness of what simply is. This fullness includes everything: joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, success and failure, clarity and confusion. It's not a selective fullness that includes only the things you like and excludes what you don't like. It's the recognition that all of it belongs. All of it is part of the fabric of existence. All of it is just what's happening in the great unfolding of the universe. When you stop judging experiences as meaningful or meaningless, as good or bad in some ultimate sense, they can be what they are without resistance. And in that allowing, there's a kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances being any particular way. This peace is not the peace of having found answers or achieved goals or created a meaningful life. It's the peace of no longer being at war with reality, no longer demanding that things be other than they are, no longer trying to force your existence to add up to something that satisfies your idea of what a meaningful life should look like. It's the peace that comes when you finally stop, when you let the breath out that you've been holding for so long, when you allow yourself to simply be here without agenda or purpose or justification. And from this peace, from this stopping, action arises, but it's a different kind of action, not driven by fear or lack or the need to prove something. It's spontaneous action, appropriate response, the natural movement of life expressing itself through the form called you. You still live your life, still make choices, still prefer some things to others, but there's a quality of playfulness to it all, a recognition that it's a dance you're participating in rather than a test you're trying to pass or a puzzle you're trying to solve. The great paradox is that when you stop seeking meaning, your life often becomes more engaged, more creative, more contributory, not because you're trying to make it so, but because the energy that was tied up in the search becomes available for actual living. You're more present to what's needed in each moment, more responsive to opportunities and challenges, more capable of appropriate action, because you're not carrying the constant background static of, is this meaningful enough? Am I doing it right? Am I wasting my life? So what happens when you finally stop chasing meaning? Nothing happens, and everything happens. Nothing happens because there's nowhere to go and nothing to achieve. You simply recognize what's always been the case, that you are already whole, already complete, already exactly what you need to be in this moment. And everything happens because that recognition transforms your relationship to experience, opens up space for life to flow more freely, allows you to engage more fully with the extraordinary, ordinary adventure of being conscious in this universe. The search for meaning arises from a beautiful impulse, the desire to live well, to not waste your precious existence, to make your life matter. Honor that impulse, but see that it's been misdirected. You don't need to make your life matter because mattering isn't something that exists separate from living. Your life already matters simply by virtue of being lived, simply because here you are, consciousness happening, experience arising, this incredible mystery of existence expressing itself in your particular form. You are the universe experiencing itself, and that's not a meaning you need to prove or justify or understand. It's simply what's happening right now, in the eternal present, where everything that exists exists. When you finally stop chasing meaning, you don't lose anything real. You lose only the exhaustion of the chase, the anxiety of the search, the burden of constantly trying to justify your existence. What remains is just this: breathing happening, sounds arising, thoughts passing, the world presenting itself moment by moment in infinite variety and richness. And that, as it turns out, is enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. The invitation, then, is not to stop searching for meaning as a new project to undertake, not to try to force yourself into some state of enlightened meaninglessness, but simply to notice the search when it arises, to see it clearly for what it is, and to return, again and again, to the simple immediacy of what's actually here. The rest takes care of itself. Life knows what to do when you stop interfering with it, when you stop requiring it to be something other than what it is. And so we arrive back where we started, but perhaps seeing it freshly, as if for the first time. Here you are, reading or listening to these words, alive and aware in this moment. This is it. This is what you've been seeking. Not the words, not the ideas, not the concepts about stopping the search for meaning, but this simple fact of presence, of being, of consciousness happening right here, right now. Can you feel it? Not as an object of attention, but as the very space in which attention arises. That's home. That's what you are. And it's been here all along, patiently waiting for you to stop chasing shadows long enough to notice the light that makes the shadows possible. The search for meaning ends not in finding, but in seeing. Seeing that the seeker and the sought are one, that the question and the answer are the same movement of consciousness, that you are already what you're looking for and always have been. And in that seeing, finally, mercifully, the chase stops, and you can rest in the boundless simplicity of what is, which has been here all along, singing its silent song, dancing its eternal dance, being exactly what it is without apology or explanation or need for meaning, complete and perfect just as it is.